All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Rocket Chiro Podcast, the business and marketing podcast for chiropractors. My name is Jerry. I'm your host. We're going to talk today about work-life balance as a chiropractor. This was something that came up in a Facebook group that I was in the other day, and they were talking about being a business owner with a family or being a family man with a business. And I started thinking about work-life balance, and I thought, that's something that I hear a lot with, coaching clients that I have, and also with just some of my website clients, other people just talking about that, trying to figure out like, how can I be successful as a chiropractor and sort of do those things and work hard in that area, but then also maintain the home life that I want and the family life that I want, and the struggles that chiropractors have with that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that during today's podcast. Before I get into that, I do want to just remind you of a couple things. One, if you want a better chiropractic website that's going to help you get more new patients in the coming year, check out the Rocket Chiropractic websites at rocketchiro.com. If you are wanting some help getting unstuck, or you feel like you're just overwhelmed with the business and marketing side of practice, check out my Next Step program. It is on-demand chiropractic coaching. It's there to just help you get some really great tips and information, some foundational stuff that's going to help you start your practice, get unstuck, and kind of get your practice going in the right direction. So all that can be found at rocketchiro.com. All right. So there's extremes when it comes to dealing with, I guess, life or dealing even, we could apply this to chiropractic practice. The extremes are going to be, on one extreme, you have the hustle life, the hustle culture. And that's become really popular. The Gary V's, it's just like hustle, 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 and the grind. And you'll hear all this stuff online with entrepreneurs and small business owners and whatever. And there's this sort of badge of honor that goes along with the grind. On the other side of it, you have YOLO, right? It's like you only live once, and sort of a carefree approach to life. And both of those have problems. If you are going to do the grind, assuming you have a family. If you don't have a family, do the grind. It doesn't really matter. Like I don't know that much of what I'm going to say today matters a whole lot if you are just you by yourself. Like if you're living on an island, you kind of spend your life doing whatever you want, however you want. But as soon as you have a family, you have a spouse, you have kids, it really changes things. And if you're on the hustle side of things and you're really going to pride yourself on that, that's going to be your badge of honor. You could run the risk of having a successful business and having an unsuccessful family. On the flip side of it, if you have that kind of YOLO mentality, you could run the risk of not really having anything you want other than these moments in time that are great kind of in that moment. But families aren't usually built well on kind of a YOLO mentality. And businesses surely aren't built very well on a YOLO mentality. I think what we want to do as like kind of healthy, balanced human beings is to find somewhere in the middle. Now, there were a couple quotes that I looked up. One's from Zig Ziglar, and he said, you can't truly be considered successful if your business in your business life, if your home life is a shambles. I don't think I did that quote a justice. You can't truly be considered successful in your business life if your home life is a shambles. Now, there's another quote, and this was during an example that someone was giving, sort of a visual example. And what he says is that work is a rubber ball, and if you drop it, it'll bounce back. But the other balls, family, health, friends, integrity, those are made of glass. And if you drop those, they will be irrevocably scuffed, nicked, or perhaps even shattered. And that's a quote by Gary Keller. And I really love that because it sort of says that, and this is the thing about money too. Somebody told me years ago, if you have money problems, you don't have a real problem. And if your only problem is money problems, you don't have a real problem. And that's not to say that money problems aren't real problems, because they are. Like you got to pay for things. Like I'm not ever going to tell people like, hey, money's not important. Like money doesn't matter. Like money matters a lot. And when you don't have it, it causes a massive amount of stress in your life. And if we're talking about family, talking about kids, like that's all going to cost you more money. And if you don't have money and you don't have, you're struggling in that area and you have a family, it makes it so much worse. And so I'm not at all going to tell you that money is not important. I can tell you that there are other problems in life that are much more significant than money problems. Health problems are one of those things. We preach that as chiropractors, how important health is, but things like family problems with your spouse, problems with your kids. Like I've had friends that have wanted to have children and couldn't have them. I've had friends who have had kids and they've lost their kids. Many of us have lost parents, obviously, which is not, that's supposed to happen at some point in life, but it's still a big deal. It's still a heartbreaking thing. I would rather struggle with money than lose my dad. And I didn't get that, nobody gave me that choice when it was, when my dad passed away. So there are things in life that are more important than money, and they're more important than your business. And if you don't keep that in mind, you can run the risk of doing something good, which is growing a business, helping patients, make an impact on your community, changing lives, like saving lives. Chiropractors talk about that. You can run the risk of doing those things at the expense of the things that are really more important. You're probably, and this is something I say a lot, is that you're not going to get to the end of your life and wish you had worked more. You're not going to get to the end of your life and wish that you had made an extra $50,000 over the course of your career, or even an extra $1 million over the course of your career. That's generally not the things you sit on your deathbed and you go, if I had another week, I would see another 300 patients. I mean, if you're thinking that, like, man, I question the quality of your life. I question the value proposition that you have for your life and the impact you can really have. The things that I tell people about when I talk to them about priorities is, if you think about the people that are in your life and the priorities in your life, like the human beings that are in your life, and even things like work and whatever, if you take those things and you put them on a target, the bullseye of that target are the most important things. And those are going to be things like your family and your kids, your spouse, like that's what that's going to be. And then you go out a ring and maybe it's going to be like some really close relationships, or your parents, your brother and sister, your aunts and uncles, whatever. Like there's going to be that closer bit of people. And then there's going to be really close friends. And then there's going to be people that you're really fond of. And then there's going to be people that know you. And then there's you get to something like social media. Like social media is on the outskirts of all of that. Like these people generally don't know you. There's people that only know me. And a lot of you guys that listen to this podcast or you follow me on social media, you only know me through social media and through the podcast, and that you don't know me. Like, and I don't mean that as like an insult or anything else, but you're on the outer crest of the relationships that are in my life. And even my wife told me one time, she said, she was talking about how I am on the podcast, and she made the comment, she says, "You're really confident." Because she knows, like, I'm an insecure person. And I told her, I said, this is a version of me. Like, I'm not saying that, like, she knows the real me and that I don't have any confidence and whatever. Like, she knows the worst part of me. And so you guys don't know that. You don't get to know that because you're not in the inner circle. And so it's important to keep that perspective in mind as you're setting your priorities, because you only have so much time. You only have so much time in this world. And something that was told to me, because there are people, and I'll get into some tips here in just a second, the things that are important for work and the thing I think is most important for home when it comes to work-life balance. I've heard people say that they just don't believe in work-life balance. Like, they just don't think it's a thing. Because if you're really focusing on your family, you're not going to be really focusing on work. And if you're really focusing on work, you're not going to be really focusing on your family. And somebody told me years ago, and I wish someone had told me this earlier, they told me that when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. And I've talked about that on this podcast before. I made this mistake when I was in practice. Like when I started my practice, I was 24 years old. I opened my practice within just a week or two of getting married. So I was starting a new family and starting a new practice. And the one thing, like, I'm not really a regrets person. Like, I don't have a lot of things in my life. I kind of feel like even the mistakes that I've made, and there have been a lot of them continually. Maybe I wish there were less, but there's the thing that I don't generally look at my mistakes as anything other than, like, it's an opportunity to learn. It was an opportunity to grow. If I didn't make those mistakes and I wouldn't have learned the lesson I learned, I wouldn't be the person that I am now. And I feel like I'm heading in a better direction or a good direction. So that's generally how I look at mistakes. With that said, when I think back on when I first started my practice, the one thing that I've said over and over again is that I would do differently is I wouldn't have gotten married before I started my practice. And that's not because I got divorced and it's like sort of like a hindsight thing where it's like, oh, you got divorced and it was a mess. I don't think that it had to go the way it went. And I don't want to turn this into a counseling session. That's not the point. What I'm saying is that I know now that the amount of effort and energy and time and the amount of work that goes into starting a practice is detrimental to having a healthy relationship. And this is true whether you're dating or whether you're married. It's worse if you're married. And if you're married and you have kids, it's even worse. So this is much harder. Like, you having the successful practice that you want to have is going to be much harder for you if you're married with kids, married with children, if you're Al. And if you're that and you're trying to be successful as a chiropractor, you're either going to have to grow your practice at a slower pace than what you would if you were single with no kids, or you're going to sacrifice those relationships for hopefully not forever, even if it's a short-term thing. So let's kind of talk about some tips here, because I want to kind of get into to why I would want to do this podcast in the first place, which I probably should have started talking about that already because I'm just rambling. When it comes to work, the fact that you can, when you're working, you're working. When you're home, you're home. At least that's how it's supposed to be. When you are trying to build a practice, you're not building your family. You could be helping your family, but you're not building your family. Like, you're generally speaking, women, your spouse or whoever, they're not like, oh, you helped 300 people this week. Like, I love you so much. I admire you so much. You're so amazing. Like, that's the only people that say that is if you happen to be married to another weird chiropractor. So generally that's not how people feel loved. So the doing well at work and doing well at home are definitely not the same thing. When you're at work, because you only have so much time, and because when you say yes to work, you're saying no to your family. When you say yes to your family, you're saying no to work. Because that's what's going on. It puts things like structure, discipline, efficiency, prioritization, like focus, excellence. It puts all those things to the forefront of importance. Since you only have a certain amount of time, since you are saying no to your family every time you're saying yes to your work and yes to that time you're spending there, do work really well. Prioritize these things that I talk about on the podcast, things I talk about in my Next Step coaching program and all of that stuff. I focus on these foundational things because these foundational things are so incredibly important. They aren't the things that sell seminars. What sells seminars is like how to get an extra $100,000 this year, or how to get an extra. But if you were to have a seminar about, you need to have structure in your practice. Like, structure is going to allow you to do things well and efficiently. Structure makes you prioritize. Like, you can't do everything as a small business owner, as a chiropractor, and then on top of it, as a husband or a wife, or as a father or a mother. You can't do everything. You can't. It's impossible. And so if that's the case, like, how do we do the things we're doing really, really well? And I'm not telling you not to be a chiropractor or not to work on your practice or not see a lot of patients or not do those things well. I'm just saying that you should have incredible structure so that you get as much done as possible, as quickly as possible, and you're not dinking around, wasting time doing stuff that you shouldn't be doing. You need to have priorities. You need to be efficient. You need to be disciplined. This is hard. But if you have a family, they should be your motivation for this. Suck it up, Buttercup. You have to realize that you're not allowed to be sloppy when you have a family. You're not allowed to be inefficient with your time. You're not allowed to sit down as a small business owner and not say, this is important, I'm going to do that. This is not important, I'm not going to do that. You're not allowed to do that. Because when you choose to be unstructured and sloppy and inefficient and not good at what you're doing, and you're wasting a bunch of time and whatever, you choose to do that, it's directly impacting your family. You got to be better. You got to hold yourself to a higher standard. And listen, I am preaching to the choir. Part of the reason I was thinking about this is I'm just thinking about it because we got the new year coming up. We got a new year coming up, and it's like, how can I do better next year? And some of the things I teach people all the time is some of the stuff that I'm looking at. I'm going, I think my structure could be better. I think my discipline could be better. I think I've been a little, I think that I haven't been prioritizing. Maybe I'm not as good in an area as I should be. Like, I've been thinking about all these things for myself because it also affects my family. And so make those things important about your work. And then when you're home, the one thing I wrote down is this: when you're at home, be at home. Like, it's a huge mistake for small business owners. We take our work home. because we don't have an hourly job. Like you go to work, you see patients, you just, you treat them, you go home and you forget about it. Like that's not how most chiropractors work. Most of the time you take it home with you. Don't do that. When you're home, be home. When you're working, work hard. But when you're home, be at home. Like don't be on a date with your spouse and thinking about work. Like don't be worried about some problem that you can't do anything about when you're supposed to be reading a book to your kids or hanging out with your kids, or you're supposed to be watching your kids play sports or whatever. And you're just not present. You're there, but you're not there. And listen, I've made all these mistakes, and it's not the reason I got divorced, but it didn't help. It contributed tremendously because I was sloppy. Especially early in my practice, I was sloppy with my time, sloppy with my effort, sloppy with my structure. It cost me more time away from my family. I said yes to things I shouldn't have said yes to. I said no to things I shouldn't have said no to. And then when I was home, I was thinking about work. I was thinking about my marketing. I was thinking about my website. I was thinking about the screening. I was thinking about that patient thing. I was thinking about the insurance stuff. And I'm sitting there and I'm physically there, but I'm not mentally and emotionally there. Don't do that. When you're saying yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. You have to say no to your family sometimes to go make a living and provide and help people and do the things you're supposed to do as a chiropractor. You don't have to say no to them when you're sitting right there in front of them. You don't. And if you're doing that, that's on you. Stop it. They deserve better. And you're not going to get to the end of your life and say, wow, that was a really good time. There's a verse in scripture that talks about a person can't add a single cubit to their height by worrying. A person can't add any years to their life by worrying. It's true. It's not helping, and especially not helping when you're sitting there in front of your kids, you're sitting there in front of your spouse. That's not who they want you to be, and that's not who you want to be around them. Last thing I'll say is that timing is important. I kind of mentioned this before, and I would just say, if you don't have a family, I would just say, good. And I don't mean good like good is not to have a family. I just mean if you're starting your practice and you don't have a family, good. Take advantage of that. Use your time. Now, all these things are still important. Structure, discipline, efficiency, prioritization, excellence. It's important whether you have a family or not, because you don't need to spend your whole life practicing. I mean, I guess you can if you want to, if you don't have any family or whatever, but that's sort of sad. I mean, wouldn't you rather go play golf? And wouldn't you rather go drive a cool car, go on vacation, go somewhere nice? I mean, really? I mean, you want to spend your whole life in practice? So if you want your practice to be efficient, you want your life to be balanced, even if it's not work, family, what if it's work, just life, go do something else. I would encourage you to do something else. Like life's not all about being a chiropractor. And so do those things. Those things are important whether you have a family or not. But if you don't have a family, I would just say good. Like there's no reason to rush that. Now, if you want to, like, oh man, I want to get married, I want to have kids, whatever, then make that your motivation. Make that your motivation for getting your stuff together and getting it together quickly, doing this well, so that when you have a family, you're doing it right and you're doing it well. But I wouldn't rush into it. I just wouldn't. Take advantage of the fact that you don't. If you do have a family, use them as your motivation. And what I would just say is make sure that your spouse understands what you're doing. And make sure that when you're home, because like that'll really go a long way. But make sure your spouse knows that, hey, what I'm doing is temporary. I got to put the time and I got to put the effort in here, but I'm going to be home for this. I'm going to be here for this. And I'm not doing this forever. They have to know that you're working hard so that you don't have to do this forever, so you can provide for your family. And you have to live up to that promise. It shouldn't be forever. If you have to forever spend every waking moment of your life working, your work is out of balance. You have a priority issue. Your work is not the most important thing. And this goes back to the hustle lifestyle. People that praise the hustle lifestyle oftentimes make their work the most important thing. And their family life stinks. Their kids don't know them. They have no life outside of work. That's sad. That's not a good life. That's not, you're making work the bullseye of your target, and it's not. It just isn't. And if you think it is, that's sad. So understand that in the beginning, you're going to have to work hard. And if you have a spouse, and if you have kids, try to help them understand this is what's going on. This is what the plan is. Work super hard so it's as short a time as possible. And when you're home, be present. And even if you're a really great chiropractor, you have 6 different clinics or 10 different clinics. When you're home, be home, for God's sake. Just we got to stop this. And we do it a lot. At least I do it a lot. And I know a lot of people that do it. Maybe you don't, but be home, be present. You can't say yes to everything. When you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. Like, that's important to understand. You got to work, you got to do family, you got to do life. Keep your priorities straight. Do work really, really well. Do family really, really well. You'll be happy that you did. All right, guys, that's it. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing this with other chiropractors. If you know someone who would benefit from the podcast, please share it with them. I'd really, really appreciate it. If you want a better website, want more new patients from your website in the coming year, go to Rocket Chiro. Reach out to me. I'd be happy to do a website for you. We'll talk later. See ya.